Hey, this is the 5-minute podcast review for Friday, October 5th, 2018. Well, I'd kind of decided I was going to avoid mentioning true crime podcasts for a while, but the one I'm going to tell you about, The Teacher's Pet, just got too big to ignore. It's another cold case situation, this time around the disappearance of Lynn Dawson, who vanished from a suburban Sydney home in 1982. Before her disappearance, Lynn had discovered her husband Chris, a PE teacher at a local high school, was having an affair with one of his students. And this is where the podcast gets its title, The Teacher's Pet. So Lynn then vanishes, and husband Chris doesn't report her disappearance for 5 weeks. So no prizes for guessing who's the prime suspect, but without a body ever having been found, police decided there was insufficient evidence to lay charges. However, the podcast and the publicity surrounding it has brought to light a whole range of new revelations, and not only about the suspected murder. There's a whole aspect of this story that sheds light on a teacher-student sexual abuse ring, with former students now coming forward. The Teacher's Pet has had over 10 million downloads around the world and has triggered renewed police activity. Just a couple of weeks ago, the police dug up the grounds of Lynn's former family home from where she disappeared, but turned up nothing of interest. The podcast is now on hold while all the new evidence is investigated, so if you haven't discovered The Teacher's Pet, now's a good time to catch up on it and keep an eye on the news for further developments. Okay, let's leave true crime there and move on to the Transom podcast. And in trying to figure out how best to sum up what the Transom podcast is about, I found something on the Transom website that explained it well, including the name Transom. So a transom is the small hinged window you sometimes see above doors in older buildings. It's designed to let in the light and ventilation. So hopefully you can picture what a transom is. Well, apparently at magazine and newspaper offices in the past, unsolicited manuscripts and articles were submitted or dropped over the transom in the hope that they'd be picked up, read and published. It was particularly a method used by new and aspiring writers who didn't have either the reputation or the connections to get their work noticed by publishers any other way. And it's this idea applied to audio that's behind the Transom podcast. It's something of an experiment that provides a podcast platform for a wide range of new audio content producers. So that's the easy part of the explanation, explaining the overall concept. It's much harder to summarise the content because almost by definition it covers a broad range, both in terms of subject matter and style. Each episode is its own thing. To give just one example, the latest episode called 2 Years with Franz is, I think, a fascinating episode. It's a look at the Pulitzer Prize-winning and eccentric poet Franz Wright, incorporating extensive use of audio tapes he put together capturing his random thinking in the last 2 years of his life. Let me play you just a couple of minutes from the introduction.
Of all the people in my life in the past 2 years, I sometimes feel closest to Franz Wright. He doesn't know who I am, though. He died in 2015. He's a poet, a Pulitzer Prize winner, and I encountered him through 546 audio tapes he made as he was dying.
I got the headphones on and everything. I feel like a real recording artist, and I'm in the mood.
He had cancer, and because of nerve damage, he couldn't always hold a pen. So he dictated his poetry onto a little Sony digital recorder his wife bought him, burning the front of it with the tip of his cigarette.
It's not a tape recorder anymore, is it? There's no tape. What is it? Digital battery? This isn't on, that's good. We sound stupid.
Franz's recorder stayed on for hours. It picked up jazz music, screaming at his cat.
Thank you, asshole!
Conversations with his wife.
Night Burial, Beth. Night Burial. There's a name for a book. He kept the most lugubrious for last. There, I got your laugh on tape.
And of course, there is always his poetry.
The only animal that cries, that takes off its clothes and reports to the mirror, the one and only animal that brushes its own teeth. somewhere, the only animal that smokes a cigarette, that lies down and flies backward in time, that rises and walks to a book and looks up a word, heard the telephone ringing in the darkness downstairs and decided to answer no more.
Okay, so that's the intro to the latest episode, but like I was explaining, it's not really indicative of any of the other episodes of the Transom podcast because the whole idea is that each episode is something different and experimental. Just go and look down the episode list to see what I mean, and you'll also see that episodes are dropped very infrequently. In fact, only one episode this year, the Franz Wright one, and only one episode last year, though overall there are currently 44 episodes to sift through going back over a decade. Okay, that's the Transom podcast, and just as a reminder, before that we looked at The Teacher's Pet, and as always you can find these podcasts using the links you should see on your screen. You'll also find my email address on your screen, so don't hesitate to get in touch with podcast suggestions of your own, particularly some of those as yet unearthed podcasts, maybe from your part of the world, maybe even your own podcast. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening to this one.